Good evening, and welcome to this evening's team video production of Witness versus Research, Questioning the Facts. Hi, I'm Janice Arpaia. I'll be your host for this evening's panel discussion on the topic of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The events of November 22, 1963, have been interpreted many different ways over the past 29 years, and two different ways by the federal government itself. In 1964, the Warren Commission was charged with finding the truth and reporting it to the American people. They said, quote, "No stone would be left unturned," unquote. In their report, they concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald alone killed President Kennedy and Officer Tippit that same day in Dallas. In 1979, however, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reached a different conclusion, that President Kennedy was probably killed as a result of a conspiracy based on acoustical tests performed on an audio tape that was accidentally recorded by a Dallas police officer riding at the scene of the assassination. The tape indicated the possibility of a second gunman on the grassy knoll. Given the tremendous amount of attention still focused on this issue and the disagreement over the facts and the evidence that were the basis of the findings of the Warren Commission, this program tonight is an attempt to present the arguments which both defend the conclusions of the Warren Commission as well as provide arguments to support the differing conclusion of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Joining us this evening to discuss their opposing views and to present the evidence as they see it are two well-known authorities on the subject of the assassination. First is the Honorable Dr. Francis X. O'Neill, former Special FBI agent and former Special FBI agent in charge of Connecticut. Dr. O'Neill was one of two Special FBI agents present at the autopsy of JFK, and he participated in the investigation of the assassination. Dr. O'Neill defends the findings of the Warren Commission, but does not subscribe to the single bullet theory. Also joining us is Professor George Michael Ivica, who recently retired from the University of Hartford. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the Assassination Archives Research Center in Washington, D.C., and author of the book, And We Are All Mortal. He currently hosts a weekly radio show on the subject of assassinations. Professor Ivica maintains that a conspiracy to assassinate the president successfully murdered JFK. Along with our two authorities on the subject are two people from the community, who, while they have a good deal of knowledge and interest on the subject, are unconnected and uninvolved in any way with the events that took place that day, or any formal research that has been done on the subject. They are Mr. Wayne Cook and Mr. Rich DeMichael, both of Brantford, Connecticut. Their purpose on the panel this evening is to represent the general public in asking of these authorities their opinions and knowledge of a murder that still plagues the American people 29 years after its occurrence. Both are well read on the subject and have prepared questions they feel are relevant to bringing about the truth. Gentlemen, I thank you for joining us this evening. The purpose of this panel discussion is to bring out the questions and the evidence to support the differing viewpoints that exist and to raise the level of awareness of all the possibilities. The focus of our discussion this evening will center on the specifics of the autopsy that was performed on JFK, as we are fortunate enough to have in our presence this evening an actual eyewitness to that event, Frank O'Neill.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin with you, Frank, and have you give us an overview of how you came to be present at the autopsy room that evening. And then I'll ask George Michael to give us an account of how he came to be involved in his research. Frank, what were you doing when you heard the president was shot?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to hear that the questions asked are what the interviewers think is important. That's number one. And number two, there is absolutely nothing which I can testify to or speak to which I have not already testified to and which is already included in this little 5-page report. That is all I can testify to and nothing else. I can offer conjecture, I can offer thoughts as each and every other individual here, but not one of them can testify as to what occurred at an autopsy other than I. I'll be happy to tell you what happened.
Okay. Well, why don't you begin with how you came to be in that autopsy room?
Sure. I was the agent in charge of Andrews Air Force Base in those years in 1963. I had charge of the Bureau's responsibility at that base relative to Air Force One and other incidental crimes which fell within the federal purview. I had seen Jack Kennedy take off a day or two prior to the time that prior to November 22nd, and was in my car in Seat Pleasant, Maryland, actually, when I heard on the Bureau radio that Jack Kennedy had been shot. Went into the police station and there observed on television the chaos which was going on there, the situation at the hospital in Dallas. Quite frankly, I didn't even know the name of the hospital at that time, what it was. And then somebody came on, I think it was Walter Cronkite, and said, the president has been shot. Knowing that the plane had taken off from Andrews, I had assumed that it was going to come back to Andrews, so I got on in my car, and drove out to Andrews Air Force Base to handle anything which might fall within the investigative purview. I notified the Baltimore field office, of which I was a member of at the time. Andrews Air Force Base is in Maryland, to let them know I was there to handle anything which might fall within our investigative purview. There were a lot of people coming on the base at that particular time. I then got word that the plane actually was going to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base, so I notified the provost marshal of that. There was a decision made to close the base, primarily because they didn't want too many people to completely run out on the tarmac at the time the plane landed. They did leave it open for the press. They left it open for the members of Congress who were still in Washington, the members of the cabinet still in Washington, the Supreme Court, the people from the foreign embassies. And shortly prior to the plane landing, which was scheduled to land about 6 o'clock, I got word that Mr. Hoover directed that I stay with the body, and also James Seibert, another agent who I requested to come out to assist me, until such time as we receive any evidence which might be in that body, which would indicate that a crime had been committed, or who might have committed the crime. We immediately notified James Rowley, who was the head of Secret Service, and he put us into the second car of the motorcade. If my memory serves me correctly, and if I so stated correctly in my report, which was written about 2 days after the autopsy, after the incident, I think about 6:05, the plane arrived at Andrews in that general area. Bobby Kennedy was present at Andrews at the time, as was a Navy ambulance. When the plane landed and rolled up directly in front of the General Operations at Andrews Air Force Base, the front door of the plane opened. Bobby Kennedy got out and went in the front. Within moments thereafter, the back big door of the plane opened, and they moved up one of these an elevator type of apparatus. The president's body was in a casket, and the casket was taken out. I think Larry O'Brien was there, Bill O'Donnell was there. Other members of the president's immediate party were there. Jackie Kennedy was there. Bobby Kennedy was there. And the movies, which were movies at that time because the television cameras, I don't know whether live or not. However, you could see them coming on down. They got out on the tarmac itself. The ambulance doors were open. The coffin was placed into a gray Navy ambulance. Mrs. Kennedy got into the car. Bobby Kennedy got into the car. The driver of the presidential limousine got into the car. The Assistant Secret Service agent in charge got into that, and they took off. I was in the car with Pamela Turner and with the White House valet and Agent Seibert. And we drove out to Andrews Air Force Base, along Suitland Parkway, over onto Washington, I believe it was Connecticut Avenue, and on up to the Bethesda Naval Hospital. I don't recall exactly how long it took, maybe 35, maybe 45 minutes. It was not going fast, but it was going at a reasonable rate of speed. It had motorcycle police officers from the United States Park Police and police officers from the Metropolitan Police in Washington, D.C. that gave us a convoy. I don't recall how many cars were in the convoy either, because my only concern was the car directly in front of me, or two in front of me, which was the Hearst, which never, and this is important, which never left my sight. It got out to out to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and coming around there were many, many people on both sides. The ambulance pulled up in front of the hospital. We pulled up right, one or two cars right in back of it, wherever we were in the motorcade. Mrs. Kennedy got out, Bobby Kennedy got out, and walked into the front of the hospital. Went up to the 17th floor. That ambulance door was closed, and nobody opened it. In the front of the ambulance, or alongside the ambulance, in front of the hospital, we had General Godfrey McHugh, who was the President's Air Force aide, I believe. Excuse me. We had Larry O'Brien, who was a member of the President's Cabinet, Bill McDonnell, another member, Bill O'Donnell, and several other individuals sitting there, talking there, discussing. Rephrase that, not sitting, just talking. This lasted for a period of time, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 minutes. I don't know. I didn't keep track. But it got to a point where I wanted to know what was going on. So I walked up to them. I said, "What's your problem? What are we doing here?" And they said, "Well, nobody told us where to go. We don't know where the autopsy room is." I said, "Well, I know. Come in. Let's go around." So I got into the car, had the limousine driver drive us around in back, followed by the ambulance, which came right with us, right there, no ifs or buts, viewing it all the time. We parked our car. Kellerman got out of the front of the car when it was parked in front of the hospital, and he evidently went inside, because when we got back to the rear entrance where the autopsy room was, Bill Kellerman was coming out.
Now, Kellerman is?
Roy Kellerman is the Assistant Secret Service agent in charge of the White House detail, and he was the man in charge of the entire operation in Dallas. Remember him, Bill Greer was the driver of the car, driver of the president's car. So Kellerman got out. I identified myself. I told him who I was, what our jurisdiction was. He said he recognized that because Mr. Rowley had already told him about it. So the four of us opened the back of the ambulance, and the four of us took the president's casket out. They moved out a stretcher, or what do you call it, a cart. The president was placed on that. There also was now an honor guard coming on out. I guess it was the military honor guard. And we, meaning all of us, specifically Kellerman, Greer, and myself, and Seibert, pushed that particular dolly with the president's body on into the, up the little ramp, through the doors, into the corridor, and immediately to the left as you get in was a room which was a small morgue. As soon as you got into that room, you turned to the right, and these were double doors, which was the door entering into the autopsy room. We put it on in there. There were two tables set up in there. The tables are the tables which are used for autopsies, where the body is placed on it. There are drains in the table. They are of a steel type or corrugated aluminum type. I don't know what, I would assume some type of steel. And we opened the casket and took the president's body out and assisted in taking him out, and then put him on the table. At that time, his body was wrapped in a sheet after they took off this plastic type material which was around him. That was in the casket, by the way, for the reasons that they, I would assume, so that blood wouldn't get all over the casket itself on the inside of the casket. By the way, this was a ceremonial casket. This was not known as a shipping casket. I don't know how many people know what a shipping casket is or a ceremonial casket is. I certainly didn't know. This was a ceremonial casket, however. Brownish in type, handles, excuse me, handles on both sides. It was not a shipping casket. Nor might I say it was a shipping casket ever in that autopsy room during the period of time that I was there, which was for the entire evening. They went ahead and they took the sheets off. One wrapped around the body, saturated with blood. One wrapped around the head, saturated with blood. And the president was there. Pictures have been taken of the autopsy. I have never seen those pictures except when they were sent to me, which was about a month or 2 or 3 months ago. I do know that pictures were taken during the autopsy, and the x-rays were taken because prior to the actual beginning of the autopsy, the medical personnel involved there, and I'm sure you people will get into who they were. It's in my report, however, so there's no sense of asking me a question because it's already in the report, and I'm sure you've all read that. They asked us to leave. Dr. Hume was the gentleman in charge then. asked us to leave until they took the x-rays and the photographs. So we walked right out to the door, which was the anteroom once again, and there were windows in it, and you could look right into the autopsy room, which I did, and observed exactly what went on. I can't give time estimates, 5, 10, 20, 25, 30, 35 minutes. I don't know. Time was immaterial. Why was it immaterial? The President of the United States was dead. And what's an autopsy going to show other than the cause of his death? Not going to show much more other than the cause of his death. So we went in. I think in my report I say the first incision happened about 8:15. 8:15 p.m. the first incision was made. That's on page 3 of my report. And they did the normal cut down in front, and they went around and they took out the stomach contents, heart, lungs, liver, things such as that. There was a massive wound in the right rear of the head. Now, once again, I am not a medical person, nor do I pretend to be a medical person. And I never went to medical school, nor did I have any intentions of ever becoming a doctor. So the terms which you might ask me now or might ask me later or a subsequent time mean absolutely nothing to me. This rear section of the head here and right this section here was blown. Not totally blown, there was some shred still there, but it was a massive defect in the head. It was evident, according to the doctors now, it was evident that a tracheotomy had been performed here, and that they told me that there was some surgery performed in the head area. What they meant, I don't know. Ask the doctors. Don't ask me. I have no idea.
So you just reported
I just reported
what
exactly what the doctors told me. And now, once again, too, my report is not a verbatim report. It is not verbatim, nor did I have a tape recorder with me. These are recollections which I had immediately thereafter, and we were taking some notes because we took a listing of those individuals who were in the autopsy room at the particular time that we took the listing. All right?
Frank, let me ask you, are the events of that evening still pretty clear in your mind?
Oh, surely. Oh, yes, indeed. Remember now, you have a man who up until 6 hours before was the President of the United States.
Something you'll never forget.
You have a man who up until 6 hours before had a brain, and that brain held all of the secrets of the world. And that particular brain was spewed all over the backs of the 2 gentlemen in the car with him, or the 2 Secret Service agents in the car itself. It was pretty messy, quite frankly. Not the most pleasant sight in the world. After they did their thing on the front of the body, they turned the body over. And it was then that they noticed, in fact, it was Agent Seibert. It was Agent Seibert who noticed, first of all, that there was a wound in the upper back right, back up here on the right hand side. Judge Michael, let me just turn over. Somewhere right in around this particular area here, there was a wound. There was a wound.
Below the shoulder, Frank? Or
yes, oh no, certainly. This is the shoulder here. This is below the shoulder, yeah.
But I mean the shoulder blade where?
To the left of that. I have it in my report here, and it can be read. You can ask me about it later. But I did put those figures there in the report. The figures were given to me by the doctors themselves. So the doctors started the probe. Oh, might I mention this too? When the autopsy started, it was delayed for a short period of time for Lieutenant Colonel Fink, who was from the Army Pathological College, I believe, to come on over, or school, to come on over. They waited for a period of time, and when he didn't arrive, they went ahead and started the autopsy. During the procedure going on, Colonel Fink came. Might I say one other thing, too? Mrs. Kennedy, according to Dr. Berkeley, who was the White House physician, only gave authority for a partial autopsy. Now, Kellerman, Greer, the 2 Secret Service agents, myself, and Jim Seibert, as investigators, wanted a full autopsy to be done, because what's the sense of a partial? You get a full autopsy and then you can see if there's any evidence which would indicate or tend to indicate what occurred. We have no authority over the doctors, none of us. So Admiral Galloway, I believe, was the commanding admiral of the hospital, and he asked us if we would like that. We said yes, and then he was the one who ordered a complete and full autopsy.
Frank, where was Mrs. Kennedy while the autopsy
was up the 17th floor during this. Bobby Kennedy was up there.
Is that where the where the autopsy was performed on the 17th floor?
Autopsy is on the very first floor.
Okay, so they were
up
not
on the 17th
present at all?
Floor. No, not at all.
Okay.
So the autopsy, when it was turned over, the doctor started to probe. And I remember Dr. Hume probing in there with his finger. And he said, well, there's no point of exit, absolutely no point of exit for this. And the other doctors got around and they looked. So I said, what's the story? How could it be? And they're befuddled, totally befuddled. No point of exit. So Jim Seibert then said, well, let me call back to the laboratory to find out if there is any type of a plastic material, any type of a bullet which can enter and then disintegrate. Or you think about Dick Tracy when you're young, and they have an ice bullet or a plastic bullet or whatever it might be. So he left, and he went and called the FBI laboratory. And he spoke to, I believe it was Chuck Killian, who was an agent in the ballistic sections of the lab at that time. And he said, Chuck, is there any type of a bullet which can hit, go in, and not come out, and have no point of exit? And he says, geez, I don't know of any, but are you aware that they just found a bullet, like a pristine bullet, on a stretcher in Dallas, on a stretcher in the hospital in Dallas where the president was taken? I said, no. He says, well, they just had found something like that.
At that point, did you assume that that bullet had come out of the president?
No assumptions. He went back in and he told the doctors. He told the 3 doctors in attendance, Dr. Hume, Dr. Boswell, and Dr. Fink. In addition to that, the other medical personnel were there, as were the other 2 Secret Service agents and myself. And Hume was quite emphatic. He said, well, that explains it. Now, they knew, and they got word, that external cardiac massage had been performed on the president while in Dallas. And that external cardiac massage has been known, in cases, to work a bullet out through the same point of entry. So they stated, with no equivocation, this is what happened. And matter of fact, during the latter stages of the autopsy, Hume said, it's very clear. The president was hit in the back by a bullet that went in and worked its way out through external cardiac massage. No question. That is it. The bullet which hit in here, there was a beveling in and a beveling out. You can see that on another piece which was delivered to the autopsy room shortly thereafter, during the course of the autopsy, by the Secret Service, a piece of the skull. It came into the autopsy room from the Secret Service. They said they got it from Dallas, and they gave it to the doctors. And to my best recollection, they took it and they started to measure it into the skull. I think I make mention of this in my report also. As I mentioned now, everything I'm telling you has already been testified to in the report.
Okay, let's take this opportunity then. I'll ask you, George Michael, how did you become involved in your research?
I didn't finish, but go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Frank. Please continue.
I beg your pardon, Janice. I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I think there's 1 or 2 things which are very important, which did occur shortly there. For the sake of posterity, there were 11 X-rays taken. There were 22 4x4 colored photographs, 16 4x4 black and white photographs, and 1 roll of 120 film containing 5 exposures. Now, none of those films were developed in the autopsy room. They were given to Secret Service. The 11 X-rays were developed, were taken back into the autopsy room, and were viewed by everybody there. I viewed them, and the inside of the head was a mess of streaks of bone tissue, of human tissue, of brain tissue, etc. You could see about 26 separate little lines going through the inside of the brain area, the cavity. I could conjecture whether they were bullet wounds and bullet pieces of bullets, fragmentations of bullets, or whether they were brain matter, or whether they were part of the skull.
Excuse me, were they radiating out from one central point, or was...
It was difficult to tell that from the autopsy, from the X-rays.
Okay.
They got 2 pieces of fragments of... The Navy put them down as missiles. I think most of the time in the Navy they put missiles, but there were 2 fragments, pieces of metal, It can be assumed that they came from a disintegrated bullet in the head. There were 2 pieces of metal taken from the back of the sinus and back of the whole head cavity in here. They took those out. I signed the report. I signed a receipt for them. Jim and I both signed a receipt. I think we signed it for the naval terminology was missiles, or a missile, which they were. When they were taken out, they were put into a little jar, and they were put in cotton, as a matter of fact, and it was screwed in my presence, and we signed a receipt in my presence, and I took it in my hand, and we took that out to our laboratory later. The autopsy is complete now. It is over and complete.
What time
just
is that?
prior, wait a minute, just prior to the end of the autopsy, or a little bit prior to the end of the autopsy, General Wheel from the Military District of Washington came into the room. And I didn't want to let him in because I had no idea who he was. Now, what authority do I have to keep him out? Quite frankly, the Navy had a subjective thing going on at that time because they're doing the autopsy. The Secret Service had a subjective thing because here we have the President of the United States, who they were supposed to be guarding, is dead. Seibert and I were there very objectively to view, to observe, and to take notes, which is what we did. So I went up and I was going to kick him out of the autopsy room. He never got very far. In fact, he just got in through the springy doors. He said he heard that the President's casket had been damaged in Dallas, and it was. So he was going to bring a new casket in because he didn't want the President of the United States to be buried in a broken casket. And I agreed, and they took in a new casket, which was the casket that the President was buried in. What happened to the other casket, which was a ceremonial casket, which was bronze in color? No way of knowing. Didn't bother me whatsoever.
What time was that, Frank?
No idea. This was sometime prior to the end. I would say it would be, between 11 and 12 in that general area.
So General Wheel came in around 11, 12 o'clock
in that general area, give or take, already, with a casket, empty casket, opened up, I saw it, okay? Okay, now, the autopsy's over. People from the Gower Funeral Home come in, and they do what they have to do to prepare a body for burial. Drain it, remove certain things, wash it, shave it, fix up the head, put the clothes on, put the underwear on, close the eyes. He looked excellent. He looked like he was sleeping when they finished with him. The casket could have been opened. They fixed up the wound in the throat. They fixed up the back here. He could have been laying down asleep. Mrs. Kennedy, according to the doctors, did not want, this was General Berkeley, did not want the people in this country to have the tremendous trauma of an open casket with the young, vibrant president, Camelot personified, there. So she directed that the casket be closed. The casket was closed, and I left and went back to Andrews Air Force Base via the FBI laboratory in Washington.
And you filed your report 2 days later?
That's correct. And that is a fact. Now, I have sworn to that. I have sworn to what I've just told you. Now, I know you gentlemen have spoken to some other people. I doubt very much that those people have sworn to what I have just related to you under oath. Nor do I doubt, and I also doubt, put it this way, that they spoke to you with first-hand knowledge and fresh knowledge, regardless of whatever the reason might have been that they didn't speak for 15 to 18 years. But I mean fresh knowledge. This is knowledge which was occurred at the time or subsequent to it, almost immediately. And if I can answer any questions, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. I'd just like to interject. Frank, you said you swore to it. Who did you swear it to? Because apparently you were never called before the Warren Commission or the House Select Committee on Assassination.
Oh, there'd be no reason to call before the House Select Committee. But I was sworn in by the House Select Committee. Don Purdy came up and he swore me in 1978, I believe it was. And in 1964, Arnold Specter, who was the chief counsel, sub-counsel, in fact, he's the man who advanced the single bill theory for the House, for the Warren Commission, swore me. We testified in front of him.
Okay.
in the personification of him. It was the Warren Commission in his personification, so we were sworn that.
Okay, George Michael, let's begin with your account of how you became involved in researching this topic.
I was teaching at San Francisco State on November 22nd, 1963. On my way to San Francisco State, I heard the president had been shot. By the time I got to the campus, I learned that he was dead. I might have been able to buy a lone assassin on November 22nd. I couldn't buy two of them, one on the 22nd and one on the 24th.
The second being?
The shooting of Jack Ruby, the shooting by Jack Ruby of Lee Harvey Oswald in the basement of the Dallas Police Department.
Who had been accused of killing the president.
The accused assassin. I read, mostly I read through 1972. And in 1972, I became very interested in the Watergate break-in, and in fact did 3 years of research in the Watergate material. I did newspaper work and radio work in Cleveland. I was in motion picture work and television work in the news in New York. And then in Hartford, I did extensive work in investigative reporting, and for about 3 years I taught courses related to Watergate. In 1975, I decided I would like to take on the Warren Report and the official conclusions. I was struck by what Francis said at the beginning of his commentary. I think I have an alternative commentary here. Being at odds with the official versions of the autopsy, either the Warren Commission's version or the House Select Committee on Assassination's version, or for that matter, any other part of the official versions of the JFK assassination, does not automatically invalidate the truthfulness or evidential value of statements on or experiences in or research discoveries in the JFK murder, because I think to argue so is to argue against the legitimate writing of history. So one of the major reasons I'm here is because I value the experience and witnessing of Francis X. O'Neill, but I think there are other ways of getting at the evidence and other ways of getting at the truth besides only witnessing. And I have many things about the autopsy that I object to. I'll say that possibly in our commentary. Just in general, my major problems are with the quality, the accuracy, and the relevance of the Bethesda autopsy. And I have major problems with the rejection of the Bethesda autopsy on the part of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So it's not just that I have problems with the Bethesda autopsy itself. I have objections to the objections to the Bethesda autopsy, and we can get into that later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. Wayne and Rich, before we begin with your questions, you both come here tonight with some preconceived notions and ideas about this topic. Why don't you just give us a brief statement about where you're at right now, what you think of this?
Would you like me to start?
Sure. Why don't you start, Wayne?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say to both gentlemen that I feel very privileged to be here tonight. I mean, I respected the work that George Michael has done for the last 20-odd years, and certainly it's a great honor to be here with Frank, who was eyewitness testimony to this. And regardless of what I feel, I respect them both very much. As far as I myself am concerned, I would like nothing better than to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Quite honestly, it would restore a certain amount of faith that I had in the government at that time. And to be even more honest, it would restore a certain amount of faith that I have in the government at this time. I won't get into who did it or why, just that I have serious reservations about the way the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee handled this whole affair. And I'd just like to reserve judgment until perhaps more comes out. And I think that Frank O'Neill and his account of this is a big step forward, and more people should be in that position.
Rich, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, I'd like to echo Wayne. It's a pleasure to be here with both of you tonight. The major reason why I'm here, and I hope that I will reflect to an extent what you all are thinking at home. And my main concern with this subject is that after reading rather extensively, I've come to the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and killed John F. Kennedy. I've also come to the conclusion that there is no government conspiracy or involvement. But my greatest concern is that there is a tremendous amount of material out there that would have the American public believe that the government or parts of the government conspired to kill John F. Kennedy. And I really have a problem with that, and I have yet to find any credible evidence that would allow me to believe that.
Okay, well, the whole point is to bring out the evidence, to question the facts, and see what comes up. So I thank you for sharing your opinions. And why don't we start with questions of these gentlemen? Wayne, why don't you start with the first question?
I'd be very happy to. Although Frank's account was very interesting, I'd like to return to Dallas for a minute. Apparently,
I was not in Dallas.
No, I know, but I'm sure you know about this.
I don't know now.
Hang on.
Don't presuppose.
As I understand it, there was apparently a relatively chaotic scene in the Dallas hospital regarding where this autopsy should be performed. And can either of you or both of you elaborate on this and also perhaps share your views as to where this should have been done?
Not me.
George Michael?
Oh, I think Francis would agree that it was a local crime.
Oh, I agree on that.
Yeah,
oh,
and
there's
that
no question.
autopsy should have been done.
Surely. That is correct.
Most probably at Parkland Memorial Hospital.
It was a murder
excellent
committed within the
facilities.
jurisdiction of the state of Texas.
That's right. And
the
they
city of Dallas.
did daily. The shootings were frequent in town. The local coroner attempted to block the path of the coffin, and I believe at least 2 aides of the president and a number of Secret Servicemen, apparently with weapons drawn, according to a number of witnesses, simply told him to get out of the way or they'd run over him, and he attempted to block them, arguing against it, and then finally they got through and they took away the body. It's been therefore, let's say at least technically, an illegal operation since the body was literally stolen out of Dallas, Texas.
Well, let me, since we're getting into once again now, which I did not want to get into because neither George nor I have been there or were there at that time.
Who had jurisdiction, though, Frank?
And what he said and what I say is both hearsay.
Right, but who had jurisdiction legally?
Jurisdiction, it would seem, laid with the state of Texas and with the city. However, as George had mentioned before, there was also a violation of the president's civil rights by his killing. So you can argue both ways.
There was overlap there.
Sure,
okay.
Yeah. But I would think that at that particular stage, the prime concern was that the murder in the state of Texas, and it was a murder there, and everybody agrees to that.
I agree with you.
And it was the Secret Service people, and it was the president's wife, and it was those people surrounding the president, the ex-president, to get him out of there.
Okay.
As quick as can.
Okay.
And she wanted him back in Washington.
Right. Frank, was to get back to your version of what happened that night, was there a great...
No,
I'm sorry.
Version.
Your eyewitness
That's correct.
account
That's correct.
of what happened that night.
That's correct.
Was there a great concern for security?
By who?
Well, perhaps by the Secret Service, because they were basically in charge of the body. But from Andrews to Bethesda, was there...
From Andrews to Bethesda, the security was worked out, as I understand it, by Rowley, Jim Rowley, who was the head of Secret Service, who had contacted the Metropolitan Police Department, and also contacted the who is it? U.S. Park Police, because they went through government property in Suitland Parkway.
But this was not your jurisdiction as an FBI agent at all. This was Secret Service handled.
That is correct.
Okay.
Frank, some of the questions I was going to ask you, I think you answered for us at the beginning. So, but just to clarify, as you know, there's some writers who believe that there might have been some manipulation at the airport of the body.
What airport?
Andrews, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, you did see the casket removed from the plane.
I hate to say what I would like to say concerning those individuals who think that there was a switch of bodies. If there was a switch of bodies, it certainly did not happen, number one, on the aircraft. Number two, en route to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Number three, in the autopsy room. And number four, from the time it was placed back in the casket. Now, if there was a switch in bodies, I certainly can't tell you when and where. If it was, beats me. It seems totally impractical, improbable, and I would say impossible that it happened in Dallas, because the president was put in a particular casket. He was placed on the plane where his wife, and there was military people on the aircraft, the Secret Service on the aircraft at all times. He came off that aircraft. I saw the casket, which was the same casket the body was placed into when it was put on the aircraft. I saw the body come out of that same casket. So I can only say that those people would probably be suffering from LSD or hallucinations or something such as that.
To be accurate, Frank, though, ought you not to say that you accompanied the casket or the coffin from Andrews into the morgue? You didn't actually accompany the body. You never saw the body as it came off the plane.
I saw the body as it came off the plane in the casket, which was open. Now, George Michael, we're getting semantics.
We're
getting semantics. Wait a minute.
No.
But I think this is an important point to clarify. At what point did you actually see President Kennedy's body in that casket, not the casket?
I saw President Kennedy's body in that casket when it was opened at Bethesda Naval. Now, that casket, however, I saw come off the aircraft.
But it was
placed
closed.
in the ambulance. It was closed, and it was closed all the time until it was open. There is not a single possibility, totally impossible, that anything could have been done to that particular casket without me having seen it, from the time it left that aircraft until the time it was opened in my presence. Totally, physically, metaphysically impossible.
But you do say that you were following 2 cars behind the ambulance from the trip from Andrews to Bethesda.
Directly.
But it was in your sight at all times?
Well, let me put it this way. The ambulance, 1 car, and then my car. Directly in my view at all times. Not a scintilla of a possibility that it could be taken out. Totally impossible.
If I could just follow up on that. Were there any stops between the air base and Bethesda?
No.
You never lost sight of the casket from the air base to
Never.
Bethesda? Okay. When you...
By the way, in that ambulance was Mrs. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy at all times, too.
The body came out of the car. You witnessed that. I mean, in terms of the casket, the honor guard, as you stated earlier.
I assisted in taking it out. In fact, not only assisted, we physically took it out and then pushed it on it.
From the time that you left the car until the time that the body in the casket were brought into the autopsy room, did you ever lose sight of the casket?
Never.
Did you physically take out the body outside the morgue, inside the morgue, or in the autopsy area?
The ambulance was opened up. The back of the ambulance. Greer came on, opened up the back of the ambulance. We were with him too. Opened it up. Then myself and Greer and Seibert and the Kellerman physically took the casket and moved it out right to the very edge. And then we had the gurney come up and the honor guard too. And we 4 and those gentlemen assisted in putting it on here. And we're right next to it all the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, right on into the autopsy room. Nobody stopped me at any time.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
When you pulled up in front of Bethesda, you said that Bobby and Mrs. Kennedy got out and went up to the 17th floor. Who directed them to do so?
I have no idea.
Did anyone direct them? Did anyone approach the car?
I can't answer that.
But the car was in your sight at all times.
That's correct.
Did you see anyone come up and go with them?
Wait a minute. I can only assume that through the radio communication, they most probably had arrangements, and I can only assume that Admiral Galloway came down and escorted them on up. That's an assumption on my part.
But you didn't see anyone meet them, and as far as you know...
Now, wait a minute. There's an awful lot of people around there, too. I mean, there
were a lot of people around the ambulance when it pulled up?
There were people on both sides here. We have crowds, and we also have Navy personnel standing. As you come up a driveway, we have Navy personnel here, Navy personnel. When I got around to the front of the hospital itself, there was a reception party of naval personnel. Just who they were, I don't know.
Okay, so they directed Mrs. Kennedy and Bobby to go upstairs, but yet no one directed you where to take the body? Because you said you all sat there, you didn't know where to go?
That is correct. Maybe they directed somebody else. They certainly didn't direct me. And when I went up and asked them, they said they didn't know where to go.
So there was no one helping them at that point?
And that is correct.
I just have one more follow-up,
sure,
if I may. The body then is rolled through the morgue room into the autopsy room.
That's right.
Still in the casket.
Now, wait a minute. We're assuming it was in the casket. We don't know until we open it up.
Okay.
Right.
How close were you to the casket when it was open?
Closer than I am to George Michael right now.
Okay. When the casket was open, what did you first notice?
Notice the body.
What, can you describe it for us?
Yeah, it was about 6 foot 1 inch. It was about 170 pounds. You want me to get technical, or you want me to say it was wrapped in something or other?
That's good, Frank. I just want to add, and I think you'll understand this, and this is not being picky, but wanting to know that when we read your documents, and they're quite valuable to me, and when we hear or read other people's evidence or their discussions, they often are telling us what they saw, what they observed, and what they heard, or they are telling us what they were told, or they are telling us what they reported. But often, as you well know, that's not the same thing. If a doctor says to you, that gives you a measurement, say, of a wound in centimeters, you did not take a ruler and measure the wound. You are reporting what they told you.
Of course.
All right. Now, what is crucial to that question is precisely what you saw, not what they said was in the coffin and the casket, but exactly what you saw.
Exactly what I saw was a body. Now, if I thought I was going to be questioned 30 years later as to exactly what I saw, I would have written it down. I'm going from memory now.
Got it.
To
That's
the
fine.
best of your recollection.
So it was wrapped in a plastic or a cellophane type. It was not cellophane, but it was, to me,
Clear
it was
plastic.
a clearish, but not totally clear type of plastic. It was placed in, as I understand it, to prevent the blood from getting in the bottom of the casket. In a body bag, no.
I know it's 30 years later. Do you remember
Sure.
what that color of the plastic
No.
was? Okay. 2 more questions, and then I'll
ask me some more. I'll be happy to
let
listen.
Wayne get
You're a
into
nice
this.
guy. Wayne is really.
Did
Go
you
ahead.
notice?
Only kidding, Wayne.
Did he have his clothes on, or were they
No,
off?
no, he was naked.
Did
He had a sheet. May I stand up and just show you, all right? As best I can. There was a sheet wrapped around this whole section of the body here,
Right.
all righty? And it came up quite high. There was another sheet wrapped around the top of the head, or the whole head here. And that was, quite frankly, saturated with blood. It was quite bloody.
Was he in a body bag, Frank?
No, no, no. Not a body bag as you'd say in the Marine Corps, as you'd say in the Army, and I've seen a lot of body bags, a lot of bodies in it. This was not a body bag with a zipper. And unfortunately, if anybody says that it was, they are in total 100% error.
One last question. Was this a ceremonial casket you saw? I'm presuming it was JFK you saw. Was he in a ceremonial casket when it was opened, or was he in a gray shipping casket?
I have never seen a gray shipping casket at Andrews Air Force Base the night that the president was taken off the plane, nor at the Bethesda Naval Hospital autopsy room. Never.
Just to clarify Rich's statement there, he said, we'll assume that it is JFK. Did you recognize the president as being the body in that casket?
Well, let me put it this way. I never took fingerprints of him. I do know what the president looked like. I've seen him enough times in the last 3 years.
And it looked like him to
also,
you?
He had that long scar on the back, too, of his back where he had been operated on. Yeah.
But you could tell from looking at his face that it was the
Sure.
president.
Okay. And I was wondering, if it wasn't the president, who was it?
But
I'd
you
have
had
been
no
him.
doubt in your mind that it was the president.
Nor did anybody else.
Wayne?
Frank, the timing on this is very critical. Now, to your best recollection, you arrived at the front of the hospital about what time?
7-ish,
7-ish.
7:15.
You
Don't
were-
know exactly how long.
You arrived at the back of the morgue approximately what time?
10 minutes thereafter.
10 minutes. So about
Maybe
7:10,
sometime around
7:15?
7:10. No, maybe around 7:20, 7:25, 7:30, in that general area.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that the honor guard helped to remove the casket from the dolly, was it?
With us.
Okay.
With
now,
us.
Was that the multi-service honor guard that
Yes.
the rest of the country watched? They had
I assume
branches
it
of all?
was.
I mean, there were naval personnel.
I assume that it was that.
Okay.
To my knowledge, it was a military honor guard. And to
But I
my
mean, was
knowledge,
it all
was
naval?
only-
Was
I
it all
don't
naval?
know. I would assume it was a combination, since that's the only type they did have out there in those particular years.
But they did not meet the ambulance until it came around the back
That
to the
is
morgue.
correct.
No one met you
No one met
at
us
the
in
front of Bethesda where Mrs. Kennedy got out.
One of the problems here, and I want to try to clear this up, is that if you check with General Wheel, Lieutenant Lipsey, Army First Lieutenant Samuel Byrd, Coast Guard Yeoman George Barnum, Navy S.A. Hubert Clark, Timothy Cheek, etc., etc. In other words, every one of those honor guard people, the time that we get for arrival at the morgue with the casket is not Francis' time, and I'm not arguing that he's wrong. I'm saying that the military of District Washington multi-service casket team says that they didn't get there until 8 o'clock. They said they lost the ambulance in transit. Now, we're talking about not one man, not hearsay. We're talking about people who are willing to be deposed and who have been asked this same question, that they lost the casket for 30 to 45 minutes later, that they offloaded a bronze ceremonial shipping casket, noticing obvious damage, and brought it into the autopsy room. Now, I assume that we can therefore talk about McHugh, who says he assisted the military honor guard. Were all of you assisting?
He was probably. Now, I don't know General McHugh from Adam. At this stage, already at this stage, I don't know from Adam,
yeah,
which is at the time.
But do you see the problem here? I don't think you're lying about that time, and I don't think they're lying about the time.
I'm the only one who's testified to what I told you under oath. Now, I don't think any of these individuals have testified.
I think they're all willing to be deposed.
That's not a question of they're willing to be deposed. I've already testified 4 days or 6 months after. Now, question of time? Could I be wrong on my time? Possible. I certainly didn't look at my watch, nor did I have any concern with what the time was.
But you said approximately 7:17 preparation for the autopsy.
Where did I say? In the report? I thought it was 8:15.
No, you said 7:17 preparation.
Oh, well then if I said that at that particular time, then that is exactly correct.
Okay, and so what I'm really worried about is that there are major discrepancies in times of body arrival.
What time did they say that they got it?
They said they came in the back at 8 o'clock after a 30 to 45 minute trip, futeless trips, trying to find that maybe ambulance.
I would say that there was no question of them trying to find anything because it was right in front at all times. And,
but they were following.
Now, wait a minute. We took it around in back, so it was not being hidden by anybody. And if they want to insist on their times, maybe they had daylight saving or something. I'm not being facetious.
No. Could some of this be cleared up by what some of them suggest that was apparently common knowledge in the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps?
What was that?
There was a known decoy ambulance and that they might have been confused by it? Was that relatively common knowledge?
Not to me it wasn't. Not to me it wasn't.
Had that ever been done before, to your knowledge?
Can't answer that. I can't answer that. Just be strictly speculation.
Okay.
As long as we're still on the casket entry, I'd like to pursue that for a minute and jump ahead. I hadn't intended to ask that at this time, but apparently in my reading, and I'm not the most well-read person on this subject.
Oh, you do very well.
Well, not compared to you guys, but there was even a third mention of a casket entry, and apparently, again, according to the reading, that was even earlier. George Michael or Frank, familiar with that?
Who was supposedly with this third casket?
The earliest
Apparently,
one?
the Cyber and O'Neill casket entry, along with the Secret Service, came in about 7:15. As George Michael just said, from what I've read, the Honor Guard came in around 8 o'clock, and then there was also one about 6:40, which, very strange to me, was 20 minutes before the motorcade.
That would be strange to me, too.
It would be. But I've got names of people who, again, are willing to be deposed on that. First-class petty officer.
Isn't it strange, though? You have all of these people willing to be disposed at 6:40, and another group willing to be disposed at 8 o'clock.
That's right.
They both can't be right.
This is what I find so unbelievable in the literature, and I can't make heads or tails out of it.
Well,
just take my report. That's fact.
Is it possible that there was just so much shock on the part of the individuals that were involved because of the day's events that time is just not clear for them?
Oh, I would say that that's a probability.
But it was the circumstances as well, and George Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, that 6:40 really targeted, first of all, the shipping casket, the black hearse. There was a lot of real incongruous information.
It's the one that you most don't want to believe in many ways, because it involves an apparent black Cadillac hearse, it involves attendants in white smocks, it involves plainclothes persons. I really think that the people who have now given that kind of discrepancy, and I mean the Ryby, the Naval Hospital Assistant Photography, Gerald Custer, Naval Correspondent James Jenkins. James Jenkins is very interesting, corroborates Francis's testimony, that is his argument that the back wound did not penetrate the president. Jenkins was there, and Jenkins saw them attempting to find the through shot, and Jenkins says that it did not go through because he saw the inside of the cavity.
Well, so does Kellerman, and so does Greer.
Well, you see, that's the. I find that people who corroborate your witnessing tend to be credible, and some of these credible witnesses are suggesting a very early entry of an unmarked hearse. Now, I know you can't speculate on this at all, but
no, can you, George?
No, I can't. But we're willing to take your word about your entry, and then we have a major problem.
Thank you very much.
No. I'm saying because I value your testimony and I value your witnessing, and I believe you're telling us the truth.
Well, I can assure you that I am telling you the truth, not as I think the truth is, but as I saw the truth.
So what we have is major discrepancies in so-called casket entries, with a whole host of people now willing to talk about it. And remember, they were not willing to talk about this because there was a naval gag order on.
And I think that that is extremely crucial right there. Now, 25, 30, 20, 18 years afterwards, they're willing to talk about it. After reading all of this malarkey, which has come out in the press, after having their thoughts built up, after having their ideas built up, well, now, how about this? And believe me, you and I will know. You as a teacher in English, you as an individual who's done some investigative work, know that it's so easy over a period of time to have an idea placed in your mind, to have it elaborated on, and before you know it, it becomes a fact.
But that works both ways, doesn't it, Frank?
No.
Yes. I think you have to admit, though, that does work both ways.
What is right there is November 1963.
But I would grant you that if somebody tells you something long enough, you can believe it, but that can be true of anyone or any time.
Depending on the circumstances, Janice, yes.
Let me ask you a question, though. When you're trained as an FBI agent or a Secret Service man, because this whole issue of how accurately time was recorded, if you know you're going to be asked, and certainly when the President of the United States is killed, are you not paying particular attention to those kinds of details because you know you will be asked to account for them later in your report?
You're not concerned with whether you know it's going to be asked or whether you're not going to be asked. You know that you have a job to do already, and you do the job. You do it in a certain context of a time limit, from the start of the autopsy to the end of the autopsy.
So you took down those times so that you could be accurate.
What time each procedure was done in there, I don't know. We put some times down because we thought those particular times were important. But as to the other times, no, not necessarily.
Well, you can only attest to the times that you did write down, but I'm assuming you looked at your watch because you wanted to make sure that what you were saying was accurate. I looked at my watch many times to find out, oh my God, my wife doesn't know where I am, and when do we go to eat? And not funny, not being funny at all. Remember now, these Secret Service agents and everybody in there were all concerned, and they hadn't eaten either, and they did eat later that evening at Bethesda, matter of fact.
I have one follow-up question, then I'll let Rich
Wayne, could you
just
ahead. Speak up a little bit?
Yes. Also relating to these casket entries, and Frank, your eyewitness account of what happened, apparently, in my reading, and again, that's all the experience I have, when the president's body was put in the casket in Dallas, in Parkland Hospital, 5 people, at least that I know of, said they were there. There were 2 funeral attendants, there was 3 nurses, and there was 1 orderly. All of them said, much as you said, that there was a plastic mattress cover placed in the bottom of the casket to soak up the blood, and the president was wrapped in sheets. But what I find further puzzling, to say the least, is that when that black hearse allegedly came in 20 minutes before the motorcade arrived, each of them, in their own way, each of the witnesses to that, said the president was not wrapped in sheets, was not wrapped in any sort of plastic mattress liner, but first of all, was in a gray metal shipping casket, much like the ones used to ship bodies back from war. It was cheap, it was flimsy, it opened completely from the top with thumb screws, and also that the president's body, for those of the ones who saw it, was in a body bag. To be distinguished, excuse me, to be distinguished from a mattress cover because of not only its shape, but the fact that it has a large zipper that runs the length of it, and there's no mistake of a body bag. And when I read this, and I hear Frank O'Neill, quite frankly, I believe you, I say, where do these inconsistencies pop up?
May I try to answer that?
Yeah.
I would say that that is proof positive that if there was a black casket, and if there was a gray, a black hearse, and if there was a gray ambulance or something, it certainly did not contain the body of the President of the United States.
But they say that it did. That's
How
what
did they
makes it
know?
even
Wait a
more-
minute. How did they know?
They saw it.
Who did they see?
They saw it.
Well, now, you just asked me, how did I know it was the President of the United States? I've known the man for a long time. I've saw him on many occasions. I saw the ripple down his back there. I knew that was the President. How did these people
But you want to know
And
the
who
truth.
are they?
I want to tell you who they are. They're not high-level people, and I think that's part of the problem here, quite frankly. However, one is Paul O'Connor. A second name is Dennis David. Unlike you, Frank, okay, with all respect, both of those individuals, after the gag order was released, testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, gave them this account of the black hearse, of the body bag, of the shipping casket, and it was basically ignored.
I was about to ask that. What did they do with that? If it was basically ignored, was it ignored, or
They
did
discounted it.
or was it checked out and found out to be totally out of this world?
Well, quite honestly, and I don't mean to be cynical, but I don't know if there's a great difference between the two, the way the House Select Committee conducted themselves. They seem to be extremely selective on what they wanted to hear.
Why is it, Wayne, that
I don't know.
all of these government agencies that have done the official investigations and who have done things from investigating Watergate, and it was the FBI, by the way, who did most of the investigations, you well know, in the Watergate thing, and have come out smelling like roses, why in this particular case do you say, well, they botched this up and they botched that up?
I suppose primarily because both the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations refused to accept the FBI conclusions, Frank. I mean, I'm not saying that they're wrong.
Now, wait,
the
now,
Warren Commission did not accept your non-transiting shallow wound to the back. It did not accept a whole lot of things that
George Michael, you evidently are not familiar with the terms or about the Bureau terminology. The FBI does not make conclusions. The FBI gives a report.
Yeah, I know what it's
factually.
called.
Now, wait a minute. Come on, you mentioned I do not draw conclusions. I'm relating to you exactly what I observed.
You're talking about your 302 reports or the
I'm
raw
talking
data,
about-
but there are conclusions in the supplemental reports that were sent to the Warren report.
There are no conclusions.
Oh yes,
per
they call
se.
Oswald the assassin.
Of course.
Well, that's a conclusion.
Not when it's no conclusion whatsoever. When the
Well,
information.
either it's a conclusion or it's not a conclusion, Frank, and it is a conclusion. And the FBI made certain conclusions that were unacceptable in terms of the evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald.
I think that
that's all I'm saying.
I think that
I say I
George,
accept
think
that
you're-
evidence.
I'm glad you do, George.
But you see, the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations both do not. So what we have here is a fundamental disagreement between your perceptions of the autopsy and the conclusions that were drawn by the people who tell us that
I would
Harvey
say
Oswald
that the
alone
vast majority
killed
of the
JFK.
information contained in the Warren report, in fact, all of the information, to my knowledge, was developed from FBI investigations and interviews of individuals concerned there. And I would say that the conclusions of the Warren report are based almost totally on the information supplied by the Bureau.
Can I give you some of my general comments on the autopsy?
Well, now, when you do that, I have general comments I'd like to give too. So, I mean...
Janice, can we ask a few more questions of clarification from
sure.
Frank first? I'm sure Rich has a few, and I do
Why don't we
also.
let them get a little bit into some of their questions, and then
We'll
we'll
get to
give
you,
you
George
both an
Michael, I
opportunity to.
promise.
I have a few of my own, actually, so.
I'm glad we're generating interest. I hope you people out there are getting ideas one way or the other. Please do. You'd appreciate it very much. We would appreciate it, too. The
Rich,
country would
do you have a
appreciate
question?
I think that from what I've heard this evening from Frank, in terms of his description that he had never lost sight of the body, and knowing, and it puts the audience at a little bit of a disadvantage, because we've all read individuals who would have us believe that there was some switching of the body that night. your testimony, I'm sorry, Frank, your description.
I haven't been sworn in here, neither has anybody. Quite frankly, I wish some of us had been.
I think it's critical that it's corroborated by Dr. Crenshaw, whose book just came out. I'm probably going to sell it for him. But he would let us, have us believe that he was the last doctor to see Kennedy put into the coffin down at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. And his description of the way the body looked and the covering that was put over it is completely consistent with yours. So, George, what I would like to ask you, based upon that corroboration, how are we to believe that there was any switching of the body that night?
I'm not here to talk about switching of the bodies. I'm here to talk about what I feel is an inadequate autopsy. Let me tell you about what I think about the autopsy.
Is it your turn or his turn?
He's answering the question. George Michael, please go ahead.
The Warren Commission, I've got to use notes because I want to say exactly what I want to say. The Warren Commission refused to use either the alleged autopsy photos or the alleged autopsy x-rays. Its medical witnesses used admittedly inaccurate drawings to argue for back-to-front wounding of JFK. It also did not use the holes in JFK's coat and in his shirt, both holes 6 inches below the collar line, to establish the location of the alleged back wound. Finally, it placed the back wound too high at the base of the neck in order to argue a back-to-front and high-to-low trajectory for JFK's alleged back wound. The House Select Committee on Assassination's medical panel recognized the Warren Commission's faulty evidence, established a flight path through JFK's body from front to back, but from low to high. The House Select Committee on Assassinations did not explain this impossible trajectory. The Warren Commission accepted the Bethesda autopsy doctor's argument for a penetrating wound to JFK from back to front. But FBI agents present at the JFK autopsy deny the back wound was a transiting wound, or at the very least report that the initial perception of the doctors was of a shallow, non-penetrating wound. What did the House Select Committee on Assassinations do? It ignored this FBI eyewitness evidence. The Warren Commission ignored or dismissed the observations of every doctor and every nurse at Parkland Memorial Hospital who saw and reported on the president's front neck wound, which they described as a small, round, neat hole of entry. What did the Warren Commission do with this major contradiction? It simply ignored it because at Bethesda there was a 3-inch excision in the front of the president's throat. Now, you know about the back wound. Every doctor who saw the back wound, the wound in the back of the president's head through 1988, when they were asked, and we have it on tape, every one of them, when they were asked where was the wound in the president's head, they said here. 5 doctors in a row said here. Yet when that body was photographed, apparently when Francis was there at the autopsy, the top of the head was gone. Yet every doctor at Parkland said it was here that the wound was, an explosive wound in the occipital parietal area. Now, if you're going to go to the autopsy photos and autopsy x-rays, the so-called autopsy photos and the so-called autopsy x-rays do not match each other, and they don't match the Bethesda written autopsy report. Let me just give you one illustration. You can take those autopsy x-rays to any x-ray man in the United States, or woman in the United States. Ask them what damage was done to the head in that x-ray, and they will tell you the right eye is gone and the temporal area is gone. Now, Francis, all he needs to tell us is that the right eye was present at the autopsy. Whose x-rays were there? So you see, I have major problems with the Bethesda report, the so-called Bethesda autopsy photos, the so-called Bethesda autopsy x-rays. The doctors I trust are the doctors who saw the body when it was first brought in, the doctors who unanimously said there was a small, neat, round hole of entry right here, and there was an explosive exit wound in the back of the head in the occipital parietal area. That's my problem with this autopsy.
My problem, to answer what George Michael has just said, he is in total error, and let me repeat that, total error, when he said that the doctor stated that there was a wound of entry in the throat. That is totally wrong. They said a possible wound.
You're wrong,
entry.
Francis.
Totally wrong. Now, wait a minute.
No, Francis,
I listened to
you're
you.
wrong.
I listened to you.
I know, but you can't say that they said possible.
Totally wrong. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, George.
We'll let him finish and then
Okay,
you can
please.
refute.
Totally wrong. I have the information here. He has information. I'm going to ask you, when did you get the doctor's certificate, or when did you get the medical certificate to make a determination as exactly to what a doctor says when he says possibly, when he says probably, when he says wound of entry, wound of exit? There is none. I have here on page 89, and you're going to say, well, that's just a digest. It might be a digest, George, but this has been the official report, not the report which you might have, or not some of the things which you might have.
Is that the Warren Commission report you're referring
This is the
to?
digest of the Warren Commission report, which is extrapolated from the actual report. And on page 89, may I say, just a question here. I mean, Dr. Carico, he's the man who was there, all right?
In Dallas?
In Dallas. Based on your observations on the neck wound alone, did you have sufficient basis to form an opinion as to whether it was a wound of entrance or a wound of exit? Answer, no, sir, we did not. The next question was the same question given to Dr. Perry. No, sir, we did not. Now, that's exact, that's verbatim, and quotes.
Now, this was questions asked by the Warren Commission of these
Warren
doctors
Commissions of the doctors.
in 1964.
Dr. Perry, in 1964.
How about their medical report written that day? What does it state about the wound that day?
Every doctor who observed and reported on the wound observed and reported a round, neat hole of entry. Now, there was a massive, and we know this for a fact, Secret Service, I think, pressure on those doctors to reverse their opinions. If you look at every one of their reports, we have a small, neat, round hole of entry. Now, let me say this.
These are written reports filed from that day?
Dr. Carico was the first doctor to see the president before his clothes were taken off. And Dr. Carico placed the wound precisely where Dr. George Gregory Berkeley, in the signed naval certificate, where he authenticated the wound suffered by John F. Kennedy, said the wound was at the second tracheal ring. Now, you can put your finger there, but don't press too hard because you can damage that area. It's very sensitive. That's why there was a ragged tracheal wound underneath that small round hole of entry. But we've got the doctor who saw the clothed president at Parkland with that round, neat hole of entry, and we have Dr. George Gregory Berkeley attesting to it. What I'd really like to note, Francis, is a number of things about the condition of the body as you saw.
I would like to know a number of things about what you just said, so let me ask you those questions first, all right? May I? Every single thing which you said, every single thing which you have written about, every single piece of, quotes, evidence, close quotes, which you might have, is strictly hearsay. Not one single piece of anything which you have there could be introduced in a court of law or in evidence by you. And you're the person who is drawing the conclusions.
Do you know that the Warren report was refused as evidence of the only case it was brought into?
I just made a question. I just made
and that's everything that you have heard is hearsay, Francis.
That is not right.
Of course it is.
Everything which I told you or which I observed is not hearsay.
You're not under oath.
It's not hearsay. I gave you testimony as to what I saw. Verbal. Let me just read something else to you.
I'd like to get back to your experience. Do you think that there were precise measurements made at the autopsy?
I saw them make precise measurements. Yes, I did see.
Do you know that there is no autopsy doctor that I know would say that those were precise measurements?
No, I don't know that.
Yes, they're
possibly we might find some, but I don't know whether you could find any.
Could I ask you something about one of your documents? I'm just going to ask you
one of my documents. Which one is this now?
This is from Francis W. Seibert and Francis X. O'Neill, subject assassination of President John F. Kennedy, to Special Agent in Charge, Baltimore.
That's correct.
Right? In your first paragraph, you say, following arrival at the Naval Medical Center and preparation of the President's body for inspection and autopsy, performed by Dr. Humes, right? Berkeley advised that Mrs. Kennedy had granted permission for a limited autopsy, and he questioned any feasibility for a complete autopsy to obtain the bullet which had entered the President's back. Now, if this is at the beginning of the autopsy, why is Berkeley talking about obtaining a bullet that had entered the President's back when Seibert didn't see it until 2 hours into the assassination, into the autopsy?
George, I cannot really answer that. I do know, as I just described to you, that Berkeley told us that Mrs. Kennedy did not.
What does Mrs. Kennedy know about a bullet in the body?
Just wait a moment. You asked me for an explanation. Yeah. I'm trying to give you an explanation of something which I wrote in 1964.
Good.
November 26th. This is a statement which I made, which we gave to our office to let them know what the situation was. As I mentioned, this is not all verbatim. This is not all verbatim. Had granted permission for a limited autopsy, any question any fellow's busy for a complete autopsy to obtain a bullet which had entered the president's back. That is correct. Now, wait a minute.
How did he know that it was in the back until 2 hours into the autopsy?
You're not 2 hours into the autopsy, George.
Then the wound in the back was seen earlier than 2 hours into the autopsy.
The wound in the back, as I told you and as I explained to you, was found by Seibert, all righty?
Immediately or 2 hours later?
When he saw it. When we turned the body over. Remember, the body was never turned over.
It was not turned over for some time.
It was not turned over in Dallas, and it was not turned over until they completed that portion of the autopsy on the front of the body.
Then how could you, the limited autopsy would in fact not been a Y incision. Frank, there's a problem here.
There is no, George, I'm not a medical man, nor are you a medical man.
No, I'm not talking about medicine. I'm talking about the fact that Berkeley apparently is able to tell you that a bullet has entered the president's back before the autopsy begins.
No, we probably told him that there was the bullet in his back there.
How would you know?
We had turned it over. Before before the total autopsy, the total inspection.
You mean there was some preliminary work done before
No, I mean that there was an inspection of the body, as I told you, and I also told you, now wait a minute, I also told you that we went out of the room for pictures, all right? And naturally, you know as well as I that you just don't start, or do you know, you just don't start an autopsy when you have a body there. You clean it.
So you're saying that
I'm not saying anything different than I said before.
You think they took photographs of the front and back of the body. In the process of taking those photographs, they discovered the hole in the back.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I just told you when the bullet was discovered. There's a possibility, I would assume, if they took pictures of the back. I'm assuming this now. I'm assuming. I did not see them turn anybody over to take pictures of the back. I'm assuming.
How did they get pictures of the hole in the back?
George, will you just wait a moment, please? Will you just wait a moment? You just told me you don't believe any of the autopsy pictures. So as far as you know...
No, I didn't say that, did I?
Oh, sure you did. You said they've all been doctored, George. Sure. You show me one which hasn't been doctored, according to you.
I haven't said that. Have I talked about doctoring of photographs?
Oh, you said X-rays, you said photographs.
I said
some forgeries too, George.
No, you may say that, but I'm not saying that.
I wouldn't say that, George. I've never seen them.
Well, we're getting off the...
Yes, we are.
It's a familiar device, Francis, to go aslant or tangential to the primary argument.
At all.
This document apparently says that Berkeley was conversant with the fact that a bullet had entered the president's back prior to the Y incision, and if he did that, it means that you...
It doesn't say. Where does it say prior to the Y incision, George? Where does it say that?
A limited autopsy. He questioned any feasibility for a complete autopsy.
He does. He did question it. I just
When did he do that? 2 hours into the autopsy or before the autopsy?
No, I would... Oh, George, now just
I'm
one moment.
Asking.
You know it's going to have to be prior to the beginning of the autopsy.
Then how does Berkeley know there's a bullet in his back?
Because we probably told them, George.
No, we see your argument is circular, Francis.
We probably just put that in there, George.
No.
Yes.
Do you know that Humes asked Perry if any doctor at Parkland induced a wound to the president's back?
And what did he say?
Perry said, of course not.
Of course not. And why was that?
Do you know that Dr.
Wait a minute. Why was that?
Humes was, well, I don't know. You'll have to ask Humes that. I'm just telling you the fact.
I'm not asking Humes anything. You know why they didn't know there was a body, if there was a hole in the back there? Because they never turned the body over.
I'm sorry, but they did.
No, they didn't.
2 nurses washed John F. Kennedy's body front and back and did not...
Where is that in? You have sworn statement to that effect, George?
I'm going to read this again to you. And that is...
George, just wait. This is all hearsay. No, all you're doing is strictly hearsay.
No.
Yes.
Well, no, just because I tell you that 2 nurses will swear to the fact that they perceived no hole in the back does not mean it suddenly become that it lacks truthfulness or evidential value.
No, all it means is that those 2 nurses, after so many years, probably wouldn't know what a hole in the back was.
I understand that, but do you realize that what we're getting when you suggest to us that you told us that you probably told them there was a bullet in the back before you found there was a bullet in the back? That suggests problems?
I don't see no problem with that whatsoever. No problem with that whatsoever.
Wayne or Rich,
Probably in our relation of typing it up here, we probably made that statement. Nothing wrong with that at all.
I think you've got a major problem with that
I don't
hole in
think
the
there's
back.
any problem with
I'd
the
like
hole
to
in
ask
the
you
back.
guys how you're perceiving this conversation here, and if you have any questions.
I think it's fascinating, and if I may follow up on basically what George Michael was saying and also what Frank was saying a moment ago. Frank, to go back for 1 second, you mentioned that you saw the casket being opened.
That is correct.
What did the president's head area look like? Because that's extremely controversial.
Well, to begin with, it was tied up with a, not tied up, but there was a wrapping of a sheet up there, saturated with blood, as I told you.
But when they took off the sheet, what did you see as far as the hole? I know
saw
George
a
Michael's
pretty
account.
large hole in the back of his head.
Basically where on yours?
Just pulling. Well, we did this the other day, and we'll do it again, right about in this section here.
Okay.
With probably, there was matting, there was pieces of bone tissue, there was pieces of skull, all there. I have no idea, George, because I did not have a, micrometer at the time. I couldn't say that.
Was it the size of an orange?
Oh, I would say a little bit bigger than an orange.
The official autopsy report, I think, put it at around 6 inches at the largest diameter. That was Hume's. That's what the autopsy report that I have.
I would not debate that. If he said that,
Fine.
then I would say that that's pretty
Now,
reliable.
the president's brain, from what you saw, obviously it was still in the cranium.
There was a portion of the brain in
Well,
the cranium. Now, wait
again,
a minute.
roughly
Now, wait a
how
minute.
much?
Yeah, we've discussed this in the past.
No, but
I don't know exactly how much. I do know that the x-rays indicate there was a brain in there. I do know I saw a brain in there. Not a total brain. It was a pretty mishmash piece of pulp.
But with
Did
all
you see
this,
them take it out?
Yes.
well, with all
You
respect,
did see them take out the brain?
Wait a minute. I saw them talk out what remained in the area there.
Okay,
In other words, you scooped it out. There was no cutting of the main thing, as I understand it, as is normally done. No.
excuse me, but you've told me privately that you have seen other autopsies performed.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Based upon those and the intactness of the brains in that case, what percentage roughly?
Oh, totally impossible to make.
Well,
a
roughly.
I
I mean,
couldn't. I
was
wouldn't
it-
even roughly figure
was it
to give you.
less than 50%?
If I said 50%, 75%, or 20%, you can take your choice of any one of those.
Let's try and relate it better. Would it fit in this glass? Whatever was taken out of his
I
head,
would
would it
have.
fill
I'd
this
say,
glass?
how far can I say without telling you?
From
I
whatever you
don't
recall.
know how much was there.
But we must have.
Nor
an
do
idea here.
you, or nor do you.
No, but we
We're only
weren't
asking you
anybody.
to say what you recall. If you don't recall, you don't recall.
I just
That's-
said that.
You know, Humes did not weigh the brain?
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why.
I don't know. Did you see any weighing of those?
I saw a weighing of particular sections of the body, whether it was the brain or whether it was other sections. I do know there was a portion of the brain,
take that
and I
back.
do know it was placed into a jar.
But I mean, to look
he,
at it.
He may
Did it
have,
fill the
he
jar?
may have weighed it, but he never put anything
Did it fill
in
the jar?
I don't believe it filled the jar, no, not to my recollection.
Excuse me, but and I don't
Now remember
mean-
now, this is recollection,
Right, but I don't
because
know-
this is what I wrote.
I mean no disrespect by that, Frank. You know
Thank
me too
you.
well to. But what I'm saying is, if you look at a brain and you've seen a brain from other autopsies, you know at least an approximate percentage of what is there. I mean,
Wayne?
20% and 90% is a pretty large spectrum.
Wayne, I've seen brains from other autopsies where the brain has not been damaged or the brain has not been destroyed,
Okay.
where a bullet had entered some other part of the body and they were doing a regular autopsy and took the brain out.
Right. But you did say earlier that in your personal account of this, that much of the president's brain matter was dispersed across the back of the limousine.
That's right. That's
So
right.
based upon that,
Listen, I can't tell you, nor can you, would be able to see specifically, depending on the amount of brain which was in there to begin with.
Let me ask you this, Frank. Did the doctors make a statement in Bethesda as to how much of the brain matter was in
No,
their
because
head?
if they had, I would have written it down.
Okay, so they did not make any comment as to how much brain was left.
Oh,
They
what
just
a
took
mess
out
of
whatever
words
there
to that
was and
effect.
put it in a
That is
jar.
correct.
About
No
how big was the jar?
Oh, I don't recall at this stage. But it was in a jar, I can assure you.
I'd like to continue if I may, because this is fascinating to me, and I do appreciate this opportunity. In my hands, Frank, I have your 5-page report.
Yes, that's the one I just alluded to.
Exactly. And there seems to be, again, with all respect, a few, and again, this is not me speaking, but for the researchers out there, a few discrepancies that I would like you to ask to explain for us, if you
I would love to if you could tell me the qualifications of the researchers who are trying to talk about
Okay,
report.
well, why don't we put the horse before the cart, and then you be the judge if it's
Sure.
worth answering or not. And actually, there they're the statements, they're not so much the researchers and what these particular statements in your report mean.
Right.
On page 3, there is a line in the third paragraph down, which I'll read directly from your report. Following the removal of the wrapping, it was ascertained that the president's clothing had been removed, and it was also apparent that a tracheotomy had been performed, as well as surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull. Now, as you know, that statement has come under tremendous scrutiny by researchers. What was meant by surgery of the skull?
You'll have to ask Dr. Hume that. I can't
So
answer
he
that.
said it.
That's correct. That's
But-
not my statement.
George Michael, may I pass it over to you?
Yeah, I find this, again, quite valuable because what we do know validates Seibert's, if not observation, then his report and O'Neill's report of what they heard. If I'm not mistaken, Seibert was deposed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Now, I can't speak for you, but I'll say what I know about the Seibert side. Seibert was deposed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he says, and he said this twice off the record, the report stands. He said it twice, all right? Whatever we reported in the report, it stands. What he said to the House Select Committee on Assassinations was that his perception of what he heard stands, but that further forensic medical work changed their perception. So he validates what Francis heard and recorded. This wasn't a problem with another definition of surgery. Apparently, according to Agent Seibert, they did in fact hear a doctor say that. But what Seibert now says, in a deposition, I believe sworn to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, was that he now knows, apparently, that the doctors changed their perception. Now, I would like to know, Francis, that if that's true, and I assume that Seibert's telling us the truth in that deposition, when did they make their new perception? While you were present or while you were absent?
Before you answer that, Frank,
Sure.
just because the people watching this aren't as well-versed as you all are, what exactly is the problem with
Well,
the
here's the
comment,
problem.
the surgery to the head?
If I may, by all accounts, and the record shows as far as I know the record to be, that there was no surgery whatsoever performed in Dallas that day.
Not a shred of evidence that any surgery was done whatsoever except to the tracheotomy.
That's
Okay,
right.
so I just want to clear this up. The problem is that there was no surgery done by the doctors in Dallas, yet when the autopsy begins in Bethesda, it's noted by the doctor in your report that he said there was surgery done to the head.
Just
And that
as I
Seibert
reported.
confirms
Okay.
that at present.
Just
Okay.
as I reported. Now, we're talking about semantics here. I do not know what the total definition of surgery is. Do you?
Yes,
Now,
I-
wait a minute, hold it. I think we had a discussion in the past, and you said, well, that's the British definition of surgery. Now, I don't know whether Humes took his training here, where, or anywhere. I do know that he said there was surgery to the head area. I reported as such. What he meant by that, I do not know.
Has Humes ever been asked what he meant by that statement? I mean, you can only report to what he said. He said there was surgery, that's what you wrote down.
For over 20 years, people who both have supported the Warren Report and have criticized the Warren Report have wanted Humes under oath to be asked really searching questions. The House Select Committee on Assassinations did not ask him such questions. We'd like him to be under oath again and answer just that kind of
So
question.
he has never answered or explained what he meant by
No.
surgery of the head. So he has never said that he meant anything other than
No.
surgery as we
Right,
know it,
and all we
or
have
that
is-
it was
That's right. No, we have
simply a
confirmation
condition.
from Francis and confirmation from his then partner, Seibert, that in fact they did hear one of the doctors say that.
Not
By
one,
the way,
not one.
By the way,
Dr. Humes,
Francis,
Dr. Humes.
I was a lexicographer in New York. I worked for Funk and Wagnalls. You'll find my name in front of the dictionary. I wrote the definition in the Funk and Wagnalls dictionary in the early 1960s for the word surgery, so I know what I'm talking about.
Well, what does it mean, George? Did you use the
It
English
means with the
definition?
use of an instrument.
Did you use the English definition, or did you use the British?
No.
the English, American definition?
British definition has to do with a medical office being called a surgery. That is, at very best, remotely connected.
That's part of it.
Remotely
Anything
connected.
which I think an individual does as far as...
No. The Humes or...
Webster's, I think, would disagree with you.
No.
Well, I
did
think we're
fucking
drawing
Wagner.
conclusions on something that neither of you can
are.
attest to.
We
You can only,
exactly
you know
are.
what you wrote, which is what he said.
Surgery in the United States means the use of an instrument on the body.
To most people or to some people.
So
No,
that's a
it means
question
to
for Dr.
everyone.
Some
Humes,
people.
is to
George, you're not
clarify
an
what he
expert in
meant
the
by the
field of
term
medicine.
surgery.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Next person.
Rich has given me permission to continue along this line about the report, and then he's going to jump
Sure.
in very shortly.
I just need for you to speak up.
Oh, I'm
Dr.
sorry.
Wayne.
I'm usually very vocal. I'm Frank's.
Smile, no, Francis.
I'm smiling now.
And I want to try and move this along so
You
that we
bet.
can get covered
You
all the
bet.
things that we want to bring out.
Frank, the report also says that you are at a loss to explain. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. Your report also says that at one point in the evening, the autopsy surgeons are, quote, at a loss to explain why they could find no bullets, unquote. Now, as an FBI as a veteran FBI agent, that must have concerned you greatly. Quite honestly, and I don't mean to go out of character here as a pseudo-journalist, but I have to state my opinion on this. The President of the United States was shot and killed by probably 2 bullets at least. When you get to Bethesda and they do the autopsy, there were no bullets anywhere in the body outside of 2 extremely small fragments in the brain cranium area. Now, forgive me, and I'll step out of that for a minute, but research...
No, keep that up, please, because I think you're trying to get a point.
Well, my point is, that bothers me personally. It really does.
bothered me, too.
Well, how did you make any sense of it, then?
We didn't. That's the reason that Seibert went to make a telephone call to the lab to find out about it. I already spoke to you about
Okay. Now, there was also, I'd like to follow through with George Michael, if I may, an event that night that was later recalled by a Dr. Osborne, in which he claims that a bullet mysteriously came from the clothing that was apparently wadded up in the corner.
I hadn't heard him mention anything such as that.
I'm just quoting the research that what I've heard. George Michael, you take it over anytime you want, because I'm not familiar with it.
It's just not Osborne, but 2 other people present at the autopsy who now say they perceived what looked like a whole round that exited from either the clothes or the wrappings of the president. By the way, Osborne is mentioned in the Warren materials, Warren Commission materials. I think the issue here is not just our suspicion about the bullet, but what is apparently in the documents, that is in the Seibert O'Neill FBI documents, an apparent interest on the part of Francis X. O'Neill in the origin of the so-called Dallas bullet, or CE Commission Exhibit CE 399, the nearly whole or so-called pristine round. Didn't you do a tripartite investigation in which you asked about the presidential jet, you asked about the location and origin of CE 399, or the so-called magic bullet, and about the origin of a piece of bone that was reportedly brought into the...
Of course I did, but that happened several days after the autopsy, and this is the discussion on the autopsy.
Oh, no, wait. The bone itself, then. Let's go to the bone. Do you remember a single bone, 2 or 3 bones that came into the room?
As I recall, it was a piece of bone.
All right. Humes, you know, says there are 3 bones, and he's always said that there are 3 bones
Well,
that came
then
in.
possibly there were 3 bones. But what did I report in my report?
Yes, a bone.
Concerning...
Well, then it was a bone.
Yeah.
Just simply
Can I just clear something up? Are you saying that there was a bullet found in the clothing?
At least 3 people at the autopsy would now be willing to be deposed, saying that there was a round that
At
was
which
done.
autopsy? Bethesda?
At the Bethesda autopsy.
May I ask
In the
another
clothes
question?
where?
Well, I wouldn't know. I would have, what I'd like to see would be Osborne and the other 2 being sworn witnesses and tell us exactly what went on at what time. At the present time, I think the suspicion that has been raised is a strong possibility that that bullet was supposed to match a non-transiting shallow wound approximately here in the back of the president, and that bullet was to match that in order to ballistically be connected ballistically to the alleged depository rifle. When Francis found because I think he will agree that it's not just something he heard, but that he observed, that bullet to that hole to the back was a non-transiting shallow wound. It meant that if that bullet was in the back of the president, the so-called single bullet theory was inoperative, and Francis himself does not believe in the single bullet theory.
May I say, Janice, before
I'm
you...
going to give you a chance to answer this, but just so that the people watching have a clear understanding of what this discussion is. theorists suggest that there was a bullet found in the clothing, and I'm assuming it was in the casket.
That's what they say.
The clothing of the president.
That's
there was
what
a
they
bullet
say.
found, and that bullet, they're theorizing, was supposed to match the bullet wound in the back, of which there was no exit.
Since there was no exit, since that was probed and no exit for that wound was found, it would have been a perfect match. The bullet would have matched in terms of ballistics, etc.
And your
Judge, I'd like to know
suspicion
where
is
you got
that
your
somebody
ballistic
planted that
information.
bullet there?
Pardon?
Is your suspicion that someone planted that bullet there?
If Osborne and the other two witnesses were to be deposed, and if they would stand up under cross-examination or under thorough examination, it would seem to me that we might have the actual origin for CE-399, which reportedly matched ballistically the rifle reportedly found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository.
Okay. Now, Frank, you were in the autopsy room.
Yes, indeed.
Did anyone find, to your knowledge, to what you saw, did you see anyone find a bullet in that
To
clothing?
my knowledge, no one found any bullet in the casket.
So
Number
this
one.
subject never came up?
Number two, that subject never came up, never was discussed in the autopsy room. Number three, you have 4 trained investigators there. You have other individuals present. And where these 3 people came out of over all these years and saying, well, yes, there was a bullet there. Now, wait a minute. And who said that they would be willing to be deposed? I have made statements when somebody such as a not historical, but a researcher coach said, would you willing to be deposed? Oh, sure, sure, just to get you off my back. I wouldn't have the slightest doubt that if somebody has said that, it was just to get rid of this stuff. Because as far as the people I know, the people who were present there, they made statements at that particular time, not years later, and they don't give a good darn what some of these particular researchers would like to know for their own edification, or for their own book, or for whatever they might be doing. It means nothing to me. It means nothing to anybody, except the general public, who should be aware of the monies being made after all of these years. I think a tremendous disservice has been done to the American people when self-proclaimed individuals start saying, oh, perpetuate the myth of this particular thing.
Well, but I think the point here
without
tonight,
one scintilla of truth or credible evidence.
I think the point here tonight is to find out, are there valid questions? Is there more research that needs to be done? Is there more investigation that needs to be done? Have all the facts come out? And I certainly think that it's, you know, I know that Rich and Wayne, their objective here is not to draw conclusions, but to find out, to ask questions, to find out more evidence upon which to draw their conclusions, because I think a lot of people feel that there are a lot of unanswered questions, so hopefully you can clear up some of those,
hope we're
those
trying
questions
to, that's
for us.
exactly the reason I'm here. In fact, I believe, isn't that the main reason for this particular thing? To get showed, to have somebody who attended the autopsy, and not to give you hearsay, or not to tell you what I think happened, or not to tell you what I think somebody said happened to her, but to tell you actually, physically, personally, exactly what I saw, exactly as I reported it 20-some-odd years ago, 29 years ago, and haven't changed not one iota from my testimony in those days as to my testimony today. Simple as that.
Rich, do you have
I'd just like to follow up for a minute with George on this close, and I'm not sure how significant it is, but
I'm not sure how significant it is either.
in Crenshaw's book, again, he, first-hand account, he watched the nurses, quote, put the president's neatly folded clothes on a chair. Now, admittedly, I'm a messy male, but I've seen people fold clothes before. They had to come off the president's body, and I assume that they did this and folded them neatly. I mean, it seems reasonable that if there was a bullet, it would have fallen out of the floor then.
Crenshaw was present where?
Crenshaw was
In
the
Dallas, in
doctor
Bethesda?
who wrote this particular book.
But where was he present? Dallas or Bethesda?
He was present at Dallas, and he watched the nurses prepare.
Rich, I don't see how that would relate to possibly placing a bullet in the casket after the clothes were inside. I mean, I don't think anyone is suggesting that a bullet was in the was somehow caught in the clothes at Parkland Memorial Hospital.
I thought that's what you were suggesting.
No, I'm not suggesting anything.
Okay.
I'm saying that there are at least 3 people now who would testify to their perception of a whole round, or apparently a whole round, having fallen out of what they perceive to be the coverings of JFK's body at Bethesda. I'm not saying that I believe that. I'm saying that in the pursuit of truth, we might just want to look into that.
No, George, wait a minute. Let me ask something. George, you are an English scholar, and you already made testimony as to how helped out in the making dictionary. Now, you consistently use the word their perception. Are you saying that they kind of perceive this, or did they see it?
Perception includes sight, hearing.
Well, now, George, you're not asking my question. Is this what they actually said? They saw it, or did I have a feeling that something happened like that?
No, no, perception does not mean
well, now I'm asking you.
Something
well, but
like
that's
that.
an
It
easy
means
question to
seeing
answer.
It, Frank. It means seeing it. I would ask them, did you see the round?
Well, then
Just
why do
as
you say that rather than their perception, George?
You're picking on my words.
Of course I am.
And you're using the very semantic arguments you used before.
George,
it's not relevant
George,
what word I'm using.
You're touting yourself as an English
Could I ask you about the condition of the president's body?
Certainly. It was pretty messy.
Yes, and that's what I want to get to. I had docs who did medical drawings, left out all the puddling, left out all the creases, left out what were bruises on the body. It looked like that body had gone some heavy time. And in the short time that it went
What were all these things you're talking about,
I'm
George?
talking about if those photographs are of the body of the President of the United States.
You just said they were doctored photographs before.
I didn't. I have never said they were doctored on this show, nor on any other show where you were present, Francis X. O'Neill.
Forgeries.
I have never talked about forgeries, Francis X. O'Neill. Only you have talked about forgeries and doctored photos.
Because I heard you say it, George.
Not on this show, Francis.
Probably not on this show.
Nor on any other show.
Probably up in New Hampshire when we were discussing.
We talked about doctored photos. I also. You want to talk about afterwards, Francis? That you talked to 6 interns at the Franklin Pierce Law Center, and you admitted there was a decoy ambulance to them, and I was standing next to you.
Did I say that?
Yes, you did. But that was off camera, Francis.
Do you have it on record, George?
You have it on record, Francis?
No, I have nothing on record.
Now, could I ask you the question again?
Wait a minute, I was asking you a question. You just say I can ask you this or this.
You were asking me whether I meant by perception see.
Yeah, it is.
My answer was yes. I'm asking you about what you saw and what you therefore knew to be true in terms of what you saw, the condition of the president's body. Was it unusually bruised? Unusually? I'm not talking about the report. I'm talking about what you saw.
My report is right here as to what I saw and to what I did not see.
You do know that that's probably an evasion, because what we want is...
No, not an evasion. What did I say when I started this show? Didn't I say that I can testify to nothing other than what I have put down here?
Well, but you can testify to what you saw. Can you answer his question? What was the body?
To my recollection, it was not bruised in any way. This is my recollection, George. Just a recollection.
May I jump in here,
remarkable.
Well, actually, what I need to tell you all is that we are getting into a time constraint. So if you have any last questions, I'm going to give you each a last question, one last question, and then you can make some summarizing closing statements, but that's all we're going to have time for. So try and gather your thoughts and think of what the last question you want to ask and what you want to say in your closing statements. Wayne, if you have your last question prepared, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I would like to submit, maybe for the viewers themselves at home to decide about the discrepancies between the X-ray photographs, the official X-ray photographs, and what you see in the photographs of the president lying on the autopsy table. I'd like that to be submitted. I know this is not a court of law, but I'd like them to make the judge for themselves. And again, bearing in mind that George Michael said that in the X-rays, the front of the president's head and his eye socket are missing, but as they will clearly see on the autopsy table photograph, those areas are intact. Yep. Secondly, I would also like to submit, and again, I don't mean to use that word, but the bruises that George Michael was referring to, and also the fact that in the drawing, those bruises have been omitted. But most importantly, I'd like to get into this issue. Apparently, from what I've heard, George Michael, and I've read this also, and Frank, you're very well aware of this, is that there are some researchers who believe that perhaps the body could have been, for lack of a better word, kidnapped from either Air Force One or the hospital in Dallas, wherever, diverted, surgically altered, and then somehow arrived in Bethesda from one of the 3 accounts. I would like to believe yours, Frank, and I would like to go on record that I do, but I certainly have my concerns. Now, what I find particularly interesting, George Michael, and I would like you to answer this for me, is that apparently within the reports of Frank O'Neill and his partner Jim Seibert, there exists some what researchers would maintain to be at least circumstantial information that would imply that maybe indeed that body was at Bethesda before they were, that in essence the motorcade that came in along with Francis O'Neill, his partner James Seibert, Jackie and Bobby Kennedy, the entire motorcade was in essence bringing in an empty casket. I've read that in the literature, and I would like you, if you would, to present information regarding that.
I find, I guess I have to say, unsatisfactory, and I wish Francis would make it satisfactory, his responses to their investigation of Special Agent in Charge, White House Detail, United States Secret Service. This was prepared by Seibert and O'Neill on 11/29/63. There are three major paragraphs, and only three. The last is on the location of the bullet found on the stretcher. They were asking him, where did it come from? Number two, the second paragraph, they were asking for where did that piece of skull come from, because that's crucial. That skull is part of a broken chain of evidence. It was only when Humes got that piece of skull that he talked about the beveling for an exit wound. And he maintained before the Warren report, he said it is logical to argue that the bullet entered in the back and exited in the back. Now, all you have to do is ask medical people about this very strange medical statement, and you realize that from where that piece of skull came was a set of very important questions that Francis X. O'Neill was asking. But it's the first paragraph. Why was Francis X. O'Neill asking the Special Agent in Charge, White House Detail, United States Secret Service, about which planes passed each other in flight? Because that's precisely what the first paragraph of this document is about.
I don't understand the significance of that, though. I mean, you say
well,
that...
I don't think that that it's going to ever be cleared up for Francis, because it seems to me that there is sufficient evidence for two, if not three, ambulances, two, if not three, coffins or caskets. There are two people, for example, who were involved in taking X-rays, who were carrying X-rays to be developed when they saw the party in front, when they saw Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy going in up to the 7th floor. That is, they had time enough with somebody to take X-rays and were taking them. Now, if in fact they had driven around after 5, 10, 15, or 20 minutes, I believe Francis said, whose body were they X-raying? So there are a lot of unanswered questions, and it may very well be that the not given question to that first paragraph in the Seibert O'Neill report that I'm holding may very well be in response to puzzlement upon their part. How did the body get to Bethesda before we did?
In light of the fact that Air Force 2 left Dallas 1/2 hour later than Air Force 1 did, and that is why, from what I read in the literature, they were asking, well, then how on earth did Air Force 2 get there sooner if indeed the body were aboard Air Force 2? And they explain, as I understand it, that leapfrogging effect.
That's right.
Air Force 1 takes off.
Effect.
Right. So, from what I understand, you have great concerns of why, when Francis O'Neill and his partner went to the head of the Secret Service in the White House, the very first question that they would ask...
Apparently, what about leapfrogging? Because I think that has to do with three important evidential concerns on the part of Seibert and O'Neill. Was there leapfrogging? Was the president's body, in fact, on a plane other than the one that allegedly held it in terms of the coffin that Francis was with all the time? Number two, what about that piece of skull? Where did it really come from? And number three, what about that bullet? Where did it really come from? Seems to me this is an extraordinary document, and it's prepared by James Seibert and Francis X. O'Neill.
Okay. Frank, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that, and we only have a few minutes left, so...
Yes, but I would like the same amount of time that this gentleman has had.
We only have so much on a tape, so if you want to begin responding to that.
I have never in my life heard such a complete fabrication, a complete idiotic statements made just now by researchers, not by people who are trying to get the information. The theory that there was a switching of body is the most ludicrous that I have ever heard of. No intelligent individual, to my way of thinking, could ever believe that such a thing would have happened.
Why?
Why? Why? Number one, because I viewed that body all the time, and there was somebody with it. Now, either I am not telling the truth, and these gentlemen don't want to say that, I beg your pardon. Either I'm not telling the truth, or I am telling the truth, and they are totally in error. Let me say something else, too. I'm not going to discuss this because, really, it's beyond the realm of possibility, probability, and I wouldn't dignify the statements just made. However, let me say this. Recently, the Black Sea Scrolls are just being examined, all righty, in California. Many of the scholars have their own ideas as to the interpretation and the meanings of the writings contained in those particular scrolls. There can be no misinterpretation as to what I say or what I wrote. I am telling you now what I wrote in my report is factual and honest and direct, and it's been sworn to.
Frank,
Don't try to, wait a minute, don't try to conjecture as to what I meant, and don't try to draw out further to what I meant.
well,
Excuse me, though,
let's
Frank.
excuse me. Let's avoid the conjecture.
Very good.
What were you referring to when you wrote that paragraph? Let's clear up the confusion.
I was referring to what was the situation concerning the transportation and the whole procedure as far as the aircraft is concerned. What else?
Was there 2 planes in flight that evening?
Yes, there were 2 planes
Air Force
in
One
flight
and Air
this
Force
evening.
Two.
There was no such thing as Air Force Two. Air Force Two is the plane which is normally which the Vice President is
No,
on.
you wrote Air Force Two.
We put it down there. That's correct, because my terminology then was different. I learned now that there's no such thing as Air Force Two.
Excuse me. We're talking
Very
about
good.
November 29th.
Yeah, wait a minute. You're asking me the question, not you. You had your turn, Judge. Go ahead.
So you wrote that in response to what? What motivated you to put that paragraph there?
To get the exact procedure as to what the times were when one plane took off, how did the president's car get there?
Okay, so what was
Just
the
for
procedure that night?
information purposes.
What
This
was
has
the
nothing to do with the
procedure that you
procedure
found out?
that night. This has to do with the procedure on these presidential trips.
What was it doing in your
that's
report?
stretching it, isn't, Francis? The other 2 are extremely important evidential concerns. The
Wait a
assassination
minute.
of John
Wait a
F.
minute.
Kennedy.
Well, but
I've answered the question.
I asked him the question, why was that included in the report? What is
My
your
question
explanation
is,
for that?
why not? Because this gives the general public an idea of how the president's plane got there, got to any place, how the car got there, how the vice president was there to meet the president.
Well, then it's a pity this
Nothing
didn't
unusual.
get into the Warren report.
Well, then it surely is, George, isn't it? Huh? But don't ask me as to why it didn't get in.
No, I didn't ask you that.
I wrote
said
it.
it was certainly a pity it didn't get in, because it seems to me that
then
there
I
are
agree.
3 crucial instances of a good FBI man investigating the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
And those are the facts as I put them down.
One more
now I'm going to have to
question
give
here.
Rich a chance to ask
question
a
here.
Just one more quick follow-up, please. I'm sure
I refuse
We're
to
running out
answer
of
any
time,
other
Wayne. I do have to give
questions
Rich a
concerning
chance
But there's just one
to
quick
finish.
piece of...
If we have time at the end, I'll give it to you.
George, it's a question to you. Based upon what Frank has said this evening, that he never lost sight of the casket. The casket was open. John F. Kennedy was in that casket. He
I have no knowledge of that, nor do you.
But I do.
No, neither does Francis.
But I do.
Francis knows that when he was at Bethesda, a casket was open, and he saw John F. Kennedy's body in it, period.
Let me just start where we started earlier.
Okay, again, we are keeping...
Very short. Did you see the body taken off the plane from the time it was taken off the plane until the casket was
It's
opened?
not the body.
I mean,
It's the casket.
I'm sorry, casket, excuse me. From the time that the casket was taken off the plane until it was opened at Bethesda, did you lose sight of the ambulance or the casket?
Not for a moment.
Okay, Wayne, you had
Excuse
one
me,
final
I
question?
just have one quick follow-through, and please indulge me, Frank. It's very important. Not only was that paragraph to George Michael very suspicious to researchers, and I hope you understand why it might be, although you would disagree that it should be. But in the first line of your 5-page report, to be differed from the second report, it states as following: at approximately 3 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, following the president's announced assassination, it was ascertained that Air Force One, the president's jet, was returning from Love Field, Dallas, Texas, flying the body back to Andrews Air Force Base, Camp Springs, Maryland. The only problem with that is when you look at the actual report, the word one, O-N-E, has obviously replaced something else. Some researchers, I submit, not me, maybe not George Michael, but some researchers submit that what might have been in the place of the original document was this number 6790, which was the Secret Service designation for Air Force 2. Now, you might ask, well, Wayne, it then says the president's jet. However, we must know that Lyndon Johnson was, at the time you wrote this report, the president. The bottom line is, Frank, and I mean all respect by this, and it's not, again, me speaking, but researchers. They say when you couple that first paragraph relating to your concern about Air Force One and Air Force Two, and perhaps, the transport of the body, and you look at this report and you say, well, what about the change in the word one? It raises a lot of eyebrows among the research community. Only you can answer for this.
Well, let me answer it. I have no concern for eyebrows in the quotes, research, close quotes community. I have told you there can be no, and understand this, ladies and gentlemen, there can be no misinterpretation as to what I meant in my report. It's quite physical, it's there. I put it there. Don't try to put words in my mouth, or don't try to put words in the mouth of somebody else to say he meant this. I did not mean anything other than what I wrote. I wrote it exactly as I saw it, and the facts contained are exactly as I reported it. Nothing else. Any other suggestion what might have happened, other than what I did say did happen, is purely poppycock, asinine, and should not be dignified by any legitimate, bona fide researcher.
Okay. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time, so I am going to have to close this program. I do thank you both for joining us. I thank both the authorities for joining us, and I thank you all for putting yourselves on the line to ask the questions.
Good.
The program's entitled Witness versus Research, Questioning the Facts. You've heard the evidence, you've heard the witness, you've heard the researcher. You decide. Thanks for joining us.